Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Hills, and I am the host of Java with Jimmy. This evening, we are here to talk with the candidate for Suffolk County District Attorney, Ricardo Arroyo. As he appeared last week, he informed us that he requested that the court release the investigation documents where the complaint was unfounded in the case to which we are referring mainly this evening. While that is the case, as named the other night, and throughout all of my commentary, and including our episode on Java After Dark, there can be multiple truths when there is an incident and situations like this. From the beginning of that commentary until now, and I will continue to say, those whose truth is what has been alleged must be centered in this conversation. And additionally, I am a firm believer that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And what I mean by that is many of us are gravely concerned about how these women have been re-traumatized by the leaking of the incidents. And via conversations, via text, inbox, phone. And again, what I have observed on social media, a large portion of BIPOC and a lot of specifically the Black community members have cited their concern over the story and how it was leaked. We must also name that one of the entities involved with this is also the entity whose founding and establishment was to return runaway slaves. With that said, and what is it really at risk here, and this is personal for me, and also by what I've observed on social media, this, with all due respect to my guest and also his opponent, it is bigger than both of them. It is bigger than me, and it is bigger than all of us outside of the context. The overall integrity of this office is at risk no matter who wins. And a key motivator for me, and many of us believe that the evolution of the difference the DA makes will, in this case, despite what I just said, be furthered and expanded if Ricardo is elected. And to put it simply, it scares much of and many of what many of us refer to as old, racist-driven, white supremacist influenced Boston and some of the present powers that be. They are scared. In this election, and based on what I have observed, and much of how this is played out in a majority of the coverage in the mainstream media, we indeed are validated in our concerns. And going back and naming, we can center these women and also name that how this even happened, the leak, is an issue for concern. I will also, as I do often, try my best to be balanced by naming that some community members have some concerns about what the media has reported about Ricardo's answers, to whether he was aware of and when he may have contacted one of the women, as well as if he solely contacted, as I said, one of the women. Also, many women and some men have been re-traumatized by what's been in the media. At the end of this evening's conversation, we will share a link with resources for those that need them. Also, please, and hear me clearly, as far as the comments, and I can monitor easily here on Facebook, and I'll do my best to monitor for those of you that are watching and listening on Twitter. Please extend grace, no matter your opinion. At this time, I would like to introduce the sum or I would just like, let me skip the formalities and just bring Ricardo back into the room. And as we have centered to the women, I also want to center this man who is in this, and it is undeniable that we must ask him and check in and see how he is doing from a mental health self-care standpoint. Ricardo, good evening. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, how are you? I'm just focused. I'm trying to stay focused on all of the things that really matter in terms of why I got into this race, in terms of policy, in terms of the impact that our criminal justice system has on so many people. And obviously, with everything that's been going on, there's a personal sort of turmoil that I'm trying to navigate at the same time. But I just realized that from the standpoint of an election coming up in, what is it, 2 days now? It's the 6th. There's just so many folks counting on the reforms and the policies that I ran on that I really owe it to them to sort of center that in terms of how I'm focusing my day to day. But I'm making plans and steps to make sure that I'm working on my own personal healing and the things that I need from Wednesday on. Because this has obviously been a very sort of traumatic event, I think, for many people, for myself, for the community, for the individuals involved. This has just been a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of trial by media, a lot of commentary from folks who don't have all of the information. And I think for everybody involved, that can be harmful.
Ricardo, one of the things that I centered tonight, and I also forgot to make a disclaimer. I would like to, because as we get further into the conversation, there may be a reference to language that may not be appropriate for children. I just, as being a former youth worker and uncle, I would say 17 and under, 16 and under. And so I just wanted to name that as well. And so, Ricardo, based on what you just said, this platform has, and you're an elected official, sometimes you can't, you get an inbox, you get a text or whatever, and you can't unsee things. Get to that minute. The other piece is I've been very attentive, and by your appearance the other night, I've been tagged in and seen a lot of commentary on social media in reference to you, this case, and also in the past maybe 24, 36 hours, I believe, as well as what has come out that what you said, the investigation would say that these were unfounded. Before we get to that part, can you just answer this question, sir? One of the things, the scrutiny, how the media has presented this. Did you lie when the Globe asked you, were you aware of, and the reference to you didn't know, and that whole piece there? Can we, as you talk about the scrutiny, can you just clarify where you can that piece there?
Yeah, and so I want to take people back to me at 18. I'm dealing with a lot of things at home. I got my mom going through thyroid cancer treatments. I was public about this. We had an issue with alcoholism at that time. There was an issue with some mental health things going on at that time. And I was the oldest child at home at that time. And so I'm trying to work through all of those things. And what I've told the Globe from the very beginning is I have no recollection of speaking to the police. What the files say and the documents say, which I fought to make public. I fought to make these records public. So I went to court to get these records, the whole file, because I wanted the public to have the whole file. What the records say is that I had a conversation, a phone call with an officer where I called an officer and said, I will not speak to you without an attorney. What I've said from the start is if I did that, I honestly don't remember having a phone call with any officer. What the records also say is that's the extent of everything. They never, called me back. There was no interviews. There was no interrogations. I was never disciplined by anybody at school. There was nothing else. And so if that phone call ever happened, I never had like a memory of that. I still have no memory of this phone call. And what the records say is that in this phone call, I called them and said, I will not speak to you without an attorney, right? And that's literally what the records say. There's nothing else. There's no interviews. We went back to his house. We spoke to him. We did this. None of that exists because none of that happened. And so we're talking about a single phone call that I have no memory of. That's literally the extent of it. I could tell you unequivocally, nobody ever came to me ever in my life, including the individual involved, and said, hey, this was the allegation I made, or there was an allegation made, or you're under investigation, sir, or we need to speak to you about this. Or, hey, will you talk to us about what has been alleged? Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's even saying that they've ever done that. That doesn't exist. Nobody's ever said that they've done that. So from the standpoint of what is there that people have an issue understanding is that that has ever been alleged is that I called an officer and said, I will not speak to you without an attorney. That's it. That's the extent of it. I have no memory of that. Like if that happened, I literally don't remember. We're talking about 17 years back. I had a whole lot of other things going on. That conversation, it doesn't say we told Ricardo, these are the allegations, you're under investigation. Like none of that's there. And so from the standpoint of this conversation, I have no memory of it. That's not to say it didn't happen. I just literally don't remember ever having this phone call. And from the standpoint of having knowledge of an investigation, no police officer ever told me this. And just to be clear, as a criminal defense attorney, that's not how this works. They don't tell people, hey, you're a suspect in a thing that we're investigating. So, if you got anything to hide, you should go hide it. That's not how they do that. They actually keep it private. So nobody ever told me that was happening. All of this investigation, all of it, the full extent of it, because I got 8 months of records released. I had no idea that any of that was happening. If you go look at the records, there's like a record there about them pulling my phone records from my house and from my cell phone. I never knew that happened. I didn't know any of that stuff was happening until I saw these records. So from the extent of like having any knowledge of this, I had no knowledge of this. It wasn't. And for this individual involved, I hadn't spoken to this individual since junior year of high school. You're talking about November of my senior year. So this wasn't somebody who I was speaking with. This wasn't like something that would have come to my attention in that way.
Ricardo, thank you. I just needed to clarify one thing because one of the media outlets, my understanding is that wrote the story and said you were 18 in the period that this happened. And so you just said 18 and you were giving clarity to when you learned about this, but I need to be clear because there's certain implications with that age.
So I was actually 16 and 17 from when the allegations were made. So to be clear, just on the folks, so people understand, the police report is dated November something. I can't remember the exact date. It's like first week of November. Okay. I turned 18 October 13th. The accusation was that something had occurred when I was 16, 17 in the junior year of high school, when this other individual was the same age as me. So I was a minor when what was alleged was alleged. But the report was made like 2 or 3 weeks into me being 18 years old.
Okay. That I just wanted to clarify that piece here. And so one of the other questions, and I will be very honest and transparent. This is, and I think, Ricardo, that even, back when this first started or whatever, and y'all would tease me and say, hey, you're the media now and stuff like that. This is a very interesting space for me, but I will own and say that, as I referenced in the beginning, that, inboxes, texts and whatnot, when you open, you can't unsee what you see. Also, I'm hearing some things in conversations. I'm a political pundit in Boston Poly, and you've referenced often the unfinding or what was unfounded is a allegation. Serve with where you can. You're a lawyer. I don't know the law. I don't believe this is currently in any litigation. So, and I will also name that I'll be quite honest with the audience and Ricardo, and you have also been very sort of intentional about, and you mentioned the other day, you broke down and talked about the hurt that was been imposed on these women. With what I said about this is bigger than you and I, bigger than Kevin, the bigger issue here with understanding how this got leaked. I think one of the things that a lot of residents, voters, folks that are keeping up with this are concerned about, and what I'm hearing, for some, it's ambiguity. And then for some, there is this buzz that refers to the fact that the allegation, and again, if there are children watching, which I wouldn't understand, but pull them away, that the allegation, I need to ask you, sir, if you ethically can just say yes or no, or wherever you're comfortable going into it, that the allegation is that you convinced, the complaint is that you convinced that you were God, and then as a result of that, there was an act of oral sex. Can you, sir?
I can confirm that.
Is that in the, is that, you know, in the, and I'll shut up. Is that in the, is that part of the allegation that is in the report? I will say I've not seen, no one's forwarded that.
That is the complaint. I can confirm that. I learned about that being sort of the complaint for the first time when the Boston Globe showed me it on August 17th. I went in to speak with them on the record because they had informed me like a day or two prior, hey, we have this police report and we're only going to speak to you on the record. And I don't think they thought that I would go in to speak on it, but I did. And so when I went in to speak with them, they showed me the report, and that was the complaint. And I can tell you unequivocally that I did not do that. I've never, you know, pretended to be God or convinced anybody I was God. And to that point, the documents released by the courts confirm that this was deemed unfounded, the entire thing, and that no crime was committed. But I also know, and this is why I've sort of not spoken on this, is that this entire situation has been triggering for so many community members, especially survivors. And throughout this process, I've been really careful to be in conversation with survivors. I've done Zooms, I've had phone calls, and they've made clear to me that the violation of privacy of all of this, paired with the complaint not being made public, has caused some people to fill in blanks sort of with their own traumatic experiences and to sort of what they imagine is always something different, and it's sometimes true to them in their own experiences, and that causes them harm. And so I've said this repeatedly, and I'm going to keep saying this because it's really genuinely true, that to everyone who has had to watch this on TV or read about it in a newspaper or hear about it on the radio, I am so sorry if this has brought you any pain, any suffering, made you relive some traumatic or painful experience. That, when I was talking about pain, that is what I'm talking about. I am genuinely sorry that this has harmed people, just the experience of talking about it, of having to relive traumas. And sexual assault is super serious. Like, as a district attorney, this is something that I'm always going to treat with care and concern, and something that merits privacy. And with justice as survivors as the goal when this comes into our court system, because we know, and in speaking with survivors, many of them who've been court involved, that they don't see justice in the ways in which they are talked to or treated, or in the results, or in the ways in which sometimes they feel forced to move forward with a complaint when they don't want to anymore. And so I know we have a cultural and systemic issue to fix with this. You know, right now, currently, we know that young people don't have full access to classes that include health or how to have sort of holistic sex education on consent and on our relationships.
Ricardo, can I just please, and I understand that you want to ensure, as we said,
I want to be clear for as many people as possible that this is super serious stuff. Like, it's not, I don't want people sort of making light. So I've been very careful with the details of this, because I don't want people making light of it. I don't want people, you know, shaming or making other people feel a specific way. And it's been very heavy to sort of watch other people impose in their own brains sort of their own experiences, and then to sort of deal with that for themselves in a way that is harmful to them. And I'm trying to make sure that folks understand how seriously I take the way I know this has impacted people, some who I've met, some who I haven't met, people who are just listening to this, trying to get a better sense of understanding all the way around. So I just want people to understand that that is crucially important to me. I understand the importance of that.
And please, I'll ask you to excuse me in me naming that in the context of, I am aware and know for a lot of people that ambiguity and the clarity that you gave, and Ricardo, you know me, I'm going to be real. It's a decision maker for a lot of people that have not voted as of yet. And so I'll return you back to sort of why we view there. And I've said it in some commentary on social media, and I said it in my opening statement. The perpetuation of the difference the DA makes is at risk. And I'll be balanced and say, some of the community believe that you were the candidate that will continue what Rachel Rollins started. Some of the community believes that Kevin Hayden is a better candidate and will do things according to their principles and values. We'll leave that like that. And so I just wanted to clarify for you that I did not intentionally, of course, the young woman, but did not want to intentionally put you in an awkward position. But I am aware of what's at risk and the stake, sir. And you
Yeah, no,
know better than me.
I hear you.
There's a lot, sir, at risk and at stake with this office. And again, respectfully to you, this is bigger than you.
Yeah, no, it's much bigger than me. I mean, I got into, so look, from the standpoint of elected office and what comes with it and what doesn't come with it, I think people understand that there's a lot of people have seen up close in the last week what this looks like with the last 2 weeks from the standpoint of just sort of people assuming knowledge or how they sort of want to operate or making determinations. I mean, you have been, just because I did an interview with you, you were being attacked. And I think, I've had to watch my mother is face on, there's people out here tweeting out my mom's face and doing all of this sort of doxing of my family. And this is all really painful stuff. And one of the things that I was aware of was I really disliked, and that's like the nice word, the way in which people were rushing to judgment on me. And so the reason I haven't spoken to what you asked me is because I didn't want that for another individual who didn't make the choice to run for district attorney. The only reason I still fully believe this, the only reason any of this is public is because somebody leaked these files illegally to impact an election and they didn't put out the rest of the paperwork. And so, I see you want to jump in. I'm just going to say every individual involved has said they didn't want this to be public. Every single one. And so if you are sitting here, the people who made these complaints said they didn't want this to be a public story. They didn't want to participate in this. They didn't want this to happen. From the standpoint of caring about what is truly centering for survivors, that confidentiality really matters. And I think when we talk about, just take me out of it, when we talk about just the people try to compare this to whistleblowing. This isn't whistleblowing. These are people getting dragged into a public square so that people can discuss something that happened, junior year of high school. All of that is wildly inappropriate. That's not what our system was built to do. And
if you framed it better than what I would, but go ahead.
And if you wanted, like, if you're asking me really, because I'm out here asking for an independent investigation and people are trying to treat that like that's political. That's not political. These are people who've been harmed. These are their documents. This is illegal to leak. It comes with a year in jail. And for me right now, the thing that's been so frustrating is I have a sitting district attorney who, we're now 2 weeks into this. Both people have said they didn't want this leaked. And he hasn't even done an investigation. He won't even join me in calling for an independent investigation. And I think people can put the dots together for why that's not happening, but that doesn't make it right. This isn't the same as whistleblowing. This isn't a minor issue. You're talking about, like, this is what kept coming up in conversations with survivors, where they said, when and how I tell my story is up to me. When and how I want to talk about this is up to me. And in this case, that was not what happened. And I think if you really want to do right by individuals, you have to get to the bottom of that situation. Take me out of it, take him out of it, take the politics out of it. None of this should happen.
So a few things there. I can't totally take the politics out of it. And what I mean by that, Ricardo, is that, and there's a comment in here from Brother Conan Harris listening in from Boston. We have to stay focused and firm on the agenda, Ricardo. These folks are scared. I made reference in my opening statement to death about what it means to elect Black and brown folks that support Black and brown folks. And so it is, when you talk about bringing attention to, and I will, y'all gonna hear me say this often, trying to be balanced in this space. We have not reached out to Kevin Hayden. They haven't reached out to me as far as to come on. And so I just wanted to name that as Ricardo refers to him. However, the court document, one of the things I saw on social media, I don't know if I saw it on somebody's post, so I won't attribute it to you. Currently, sir, James, the host, not you, am raising this. There is some the concern of the disingenuousness and everything that you talked about the confidentiality and how these women were pulled into this as a political pawn. Some of the hearsay is that there was a phone call saying you're going to be a big part of a political scandal and all that other stuff. we would be remiss if we did not name the disingenuousness. And so one of the things that perpetuates that is, did your police report confirm that there was a connection with the investigative officer and someone who was very close to the current DA?
I mean, it was shocking. It was literally so. And you can see it yourself. It's been confirmed by him. The driver for Kevin Hayden is the same detective who closed my case with unfounded. And so I have a hard time believing that this never came up. Just I'm being like a regular human.
In the car, come on.
Never came up. You know what I'm saying? Never came up. I have a hard time believing that that is true. And for at least 2 weeks, I had him, just on Friday, he released a statement using the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, which is illegal and unethical, saying that he read my file and that unfounded wasn't in there. I have a hard time believing he didn't know that wasn't true when his driver was the one who said it was unfounded. And the Boston Globe had already reported that we had access from BPD, that they had told us that there were files in their possession that said unfounded. So I think there's a troubling pattern with him where we continue to see sort of systemic sort of corruption and issues that he can come on here if he wants to address them himself. I hope he does. But frankly, it's just been a pattern. And to bring it back to like the policies and the way in which this matters, this is when everybody's paying attention. We are in the middle of an election. Everybody's watching. What happens for 4 years when we're talking about individuals with other cases? How are they being treated? Why are you reading my file and releasing a press release on a file that led to no charges, on a file that the ADA who was tasked with it said no crime was committed, where the driver who drives you around found it to be unfounded? How are you using office resources to write a press release on that? What are you doing? And if that's what you're doing for me in this public way, in this public light, what are the things that we can't see that are happening on a day-to-day basis? And so for me, the stakes are so high because I know what Rachel went through just to bring policies forward in 3 years. Right now they got her under investigation for a Hatch Act violation right now. Like the amount of scrutiny and pressure and things that they do for individuals who are trying to push forward a Black and brown agenda when it comes to criminal justice reform has been scary. And I think one of the things I knew when I walked into this arena, I was a public defender. When you're in courts, we're not like royalty. It's not how this works, right? Like we're often fighting for people to just be seen as human beings. That's literally what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, was fighting for the individual next to me to be respected as a human being, not to be written off as somebody who's mentally ill or like, oh, that person's mentally ill, so I could do whatever I want to this. And we're going to hold them over there. We're going to do this. I had to fight for that person's respect and that humanity for somebody who's, poor. And so I don't really care about what this person has no power to me. Often as a public defender, you're fighting with the courts to respect the agency and the independence and the humanity of an individual who has no power to do anything to them, to do anything to this system in any structural way. They are powerless often, except for the words and the ability and the sort of skill set of the people who represent them to do anything, unless you do it this way, unless you do it through elections, unless you do it through like community power. And so when we talk about, why this happened 2 weeks before an election or all of that, I think it was largely to distract folks, to give people the wrong impression of who I am and what I'm about. But I'm 34 years old right now. We're talking about when I was a junior in high school. And for where I'm at right now, the more relevant conversation for me in many ways is what's going to happen to our city, all of the cities that make up Suffolk County for the next 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, because in 3 years, we saw more progress on destroying racial disparity, working towards class disparities being eliminated, working towards a more just system than we had seen in any of the rest of the time I've been alive. And so that's the kind of progress we have on the table. And I really want folks to focus on what are we getting out of whoever gets elected there, right? You don't have to like me. That's fine. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like Kevin. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at what's on the table, what are they bringing you? There's only one of us who's fighting to end mandatory minimums. That's me. There's only one of us.
Can I chime in a little bit here to get to some level of policy? And someone just sent to me, and so it looks like it's from your campaign, but of course I don't believe that you would put out anything that can't, through debates, media, be refuted. And so, support Rachel Rollins' policies. Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. So let me also say, as you're pointing to some concerns, Kevin Hayden, for those that wonder and may have presumed that I just have Ricardo on here, Kevin Hayden was on here, and I asked Kevin Hayden twice, asked him, referred to the fact, sir, this is being recorded. I have it on film, tape, online, whatever. Will you perpetuate Rachel Rollins' policies? He said yes twice. So now on this report, when we get into some policy, and then I'll let you go. Support Rachel Rollins' policies. Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. And qualified immunity. Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. And mandatory minimums, yes. Hayden, Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. Refuse police union money. Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. And no knock warrants. Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. And cash bail for non-violent offenses. Arroyo, yes. Hayden, no. With a caveat that Hayden says yes, but continues to ask for cash bail as DA on non-violent offenses. I'm presuming, and I'm sorry, I've been calling you Ricardo all this time. Attorney Arroyo, that it can be substantiated through the results of
he does press releases on it.
Oh,
I mean, go look at the press releases. I mean, we had a 13-year-old he put a $5,000 bail on. So when you're talking about, so look, everything that's on there can be substantiated. Even the Rachel Rollins policies, he's tried to have this both ways. He's tried to say, I don't have Rachel Rollins's policy of not charging on these charges, even though peer review studies have shown that it works, even though it reduces crime on the long run, even though we know, our communities definitely know, the less interaction you have with our criminal justice system, the better off you will be.
And we had Bobby Constantino on, a former employee.
He did a great job. I watched that. That was a great interview.
And the stats are
all of the data. That I always am so surprised that, and this tells you where people are on these things. You know, every time I am on an outlet that is like, you know, I'm not going to shout out news stations, but when I'm doing radio interviews, when I'm doing journalist interviews, they always try to make me defend why I support the list of 15, which I helped write. They always ask me why is that good? They never ask him why not do it, when all of the data shows that it's effective. It literally has a causal impact on reducing crime. This is a peer-reviewed data study. It's just evidence backed. This is evidence. Why are you asking me why I support things that work? Nobody says, hey, why do you support things that work? James, like, why are you doing that? Right? Like, that doesn't make sense. I support things that work because they work. He doesn't support the list of 15. What he says is that he's going to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. That is called prosecutorial discretion. That is what every prosecutor has said forever. And just to be clear, the list of 15, 1 in 4 people still got charged, 25%, because they looked at them on a case-by-case basis. And so you can't say that with any sort of, you know, we're just going to tell the truth here. You can't say that and be telling the truth. And so he doesn't support the list of 15. Most people who have had interactions with the court system now, whether they're attorneys, families of people who are interacting with that court system, will tell you that there's a lesser level of sort of discretion being used. And on top of all of that, when you say something like, I'm not going to have a written policy, this is so important. I'm not going to have a written policy. Our frontline assistant district attorneys are the youngest attorneys in the room. Most of them are learning how to do the job. Most of them don't look like the people who are coming into contact with our criminal justice system. Most of them don't have those perspectives. Most of them don't know the collateral consequences of immigration or mental health or any of the or housing or any of the different ways in which what you're going to do is going to impact that person, because they haven't had that training yet. What the list of 15 said is, if you see these charges on that charge sheet and you want to charge this individual, you have to talk to a supervisor.
So can I ask you one word there? There was policy.
Yes.
For me, this whole thing is all about policy.
It's all about checks and balances, right? Like if I'm running the DA's office, we are talking about hundreds of attorneys, like 170 right now. It might be up, it might be down. It's around 170 attorneys. There's 9 different municipal district courts. I'm not going to be in every single municipal district court. That's impossible. And so what you do with the policy is you have a chief of each district court that exists right now. The policy under Rachel was if these charges came up, that individual assistant district attorney had to go and that assistant district attorney says, yo, I think I want to charge this. They had to go talk to a chief.
So, which inadvertently, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm learning as we go, and I get excited when I learn. So, what that still leaves, to some extent, and I know the term you use, but to some extent, there is still room for it to be looked at a case-by-case basis. And if the ADA, though, everything you named about them not having a whole lot of life experience, and there still is the discretion to go through, and because there's still in some level of training to go through and talk to a superior.
Yes.
So as much as it was a blanket,
they can charge it.
Okay.
So this is the difference. With no policy, you got a frontline assistant district attorney making all of the charging decisions on their own. And then you're putting into that whatever racial sort of undertones,
location,
or whatever
rumor about the judge,
all of that they're making on their own. Under Rachel, with these low-level charges, if they wanted to charge it, they would have to go and make a case for that. They would have to go talk to a chief or a supervisor and say, this is why I think this is different. Now, 25% of the time it was getting charged. So that's still 1 in 4. But you had to go and sort of have a check so that somebody was going to say, well, why do you feel like that? Yep. What do you think makes this different? Right now, without that check, these individuals are making those decisions on their own on a day-to-day basis. And that's going to be deeply impacted by that person's life experience.
It already has been.
Well, we've seen this for decades. That racial disparity gap hasn't built itself. Like, that's what these policies are in place to sort of put a check on. And on top of that, we know that not charging these things leads to, this is the data, this is what Bobby Constantino was talking to you about, this is what's been peer reviewed, 64% of people who don't get charged, who get diverted into resources or programming, never come back. That was over a 15-year period of time that they studied this. They don't come back. They just move on with their life.
And so the other thing is, and someone named this the other day, and Ricardo, get me for this later. This is almost a credit to your opponent. Someone stated they took it as getting at Kevin Hayden, and I had to think about the science behind this. Of course, it appears right now that crime is up because more people are being prosecuted. So that is something, a real factor in the data that I'm noticing some comments and some stuff I see.
Yeah, and I just think like people got to also put into context, because this is why I ran. Like, I didn't run to not tell the truth. Like, these systems don't do well with Black and brown communities. They don't treat us, they don't give us justice. Before he passed, Chief Justice Ron Gantz did a whole study on race in the courts. And that study found that with juveniles, some like 75% of sentences were impacted by whether or not that juvenile was Black. Okay, that's if you were Black, you were getting a worse sentence. They also did studies on how many more days in jail you got if you were a person of color for the same charges, and it was like something like 148 or 170 on average more days in jail. If you can acknowledge that the system is racist when it comes to juvenile decisions, that is racist when it comes to bail allotments, that is racist when it comes to sentencing, how are you going to say that it's not racist when it comes to arraignments without checks and balances? How are you going to say that? And when we talk about what justice looks like, because people want to say, oh, crime is up in my neighborhood. Well, locking folks up hasn't brought crime down. And so if we want to get to what really works with folks, I've always said this, because people hear me talk and they'll say, Ricardo doesn't believe in accountability. No, I don't believe that the only version of accountability is incarceration.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I believe, and for the record, I believe the best accountability is change behavior. That's what I believe. And so to get to change behavior, to get people to break cycles of trauma and cycles of harm, do I think that the recipe for that is more trauma and more harm? No. Do I think jail is often more trauma and more harm? Absolutely. Do I think taking people out of caring families or out of a situation where they can actually get the resources they need or get job training or get to keep their home or their car or their families intact? Do I think that taking them out of those situations is somehow, because it's tough on crime, that's going to lower crime? No. And the way I try to talk to people about this is, and that's lived experience as much as it is the data. And what I will say is, when you talk about this, there's a certain set that get really nervous about this.
Can we name what that? Do you want me to do it or you do it?
You go ahead and do it, and then I'll just nod my head.
Well, maybe you don't want me to do it because you're a candidate and I have to make it a little more colorful language.
I was to say it like this. There is a conservative set that this system works perfectly fine for. They see no issues with the way it works. They believe it's fair and just, even with all the data I told you. They will say crazy things like people of color just commit more crime, Ricardo. They will say racist things like that and not understand that what is violent is poverty. What is violent is lack of opportunity. What is violent is giving people records and then saying, why can't they get their life together when you now cause them to be able to access housing? They can't access it anymore because of the record you gave them and the charges you gave them. They can't access student loans because of the charges you gave them. They can't access voting in some states if they decide to move because of the charges you gave them. They can't get jobs because of the charging you gave them. And that's all problematic. And guess who controls all of that? Your district attorney. And so when you're talking to me about crime and violence and how do we deal with that, I know that tough on crime and the war on drugs and mass incarceration, that didn't fix anything in our communities. That caused cycles of harm and trauma
that we're still living with today. But go ahead.
And people who come out of our justice system better in spite of it. That's it's literally in spite of the system. They do not come out better because the system worked. It's usually an exception to the rule. It is in spite of that system. What we have to do is create pathways to a different type of justice, to a restorative justice principle, where I say this individual who is causing harm right now, I don't want them to cause harm anymore. And so what's the best way to get this individual to not cause harm? Now, are there going to be people who need to be incarcerated because of the kind of harm that they are creating? Yes. But even in that system, you have to make sure that you're giving them resources and accesses for when they come out, because in reality, something like 95% of people who are incarcerated are coming back home. And so if you're not addressing these underlying issues which are often poverty, are often the fact that they have needs that they need to survive that aren't being met, are often because we privatize healthcare, so they're not receiving mental health treatment or the kinds of treatments or resources they need to make. There's real life reasons for why people are doing harm in community, and it's usually not because they like it or they enjoy it or it's for a good time. It is usually because this is my survival method. This is how I'm getting the resources that otherwise I'm not getting. And if you're not going to create a system that understands that people are, and this is where this is my whole life philosophy. This is what I tell people, because I think it's really illuminates where I come from. I believe people are good. I believe people are innately good. I believe that when they do something wrong, when they do some harm, it's because there's some untreated trauma. It's because there's some untreated need. It's because there's something we could have wrapped that person up with or provided that individual that would have stepped in and done something for them to prevent them from being in a place where they are causing harm. So many of our people are working and moving through trauma. I used to tell people what made me good as a public defender was that I could do backstrokes in trauma. I was so used to being around trauma that it's like a muscle and you exercise it. I had secondary trauma. I had all kinds of trauma. And so from the standpoint of how I do the work I do, how I move through the things I move through, yes, I recognize that I am often working through trauma. And it's my trauma, it's community trauma, it's individuals' trauma, and that's heavy and it's hard. And when we're talking about how to best meet these people's needs, how to meet these individuals, like I'll just tell you one brief thing that's very different. On that list, you said charging minors as adults. I would never do that. The reason I would never do that is because any minor I've ever seen who has got into trouble in some way, shape, or form is usually dealing with trauma. And I'm not going to harm that individual for the rest of their lives by treating them with the kind of incarceration and the kind of harm that our system bestows on them and traps them in that trauma and furthers that trauma and cements trauma. I've never seen anything get better with that. I've never said, hey, you know what would make this traumatic situation better for this individual? If we just gave them more trauma. Let's figure out if that will shape them up and make them not do this. You know what usually does? Care, love, resources.
Healthy relationships with adults.
And so that's not to say that I'm not going to, that Ricardo's not going to give people incarceration when they commit crimes that merit incarceration. What that says is when people are in harm or when they are causing harm, my first look is, how do I get to accountability? And accountability for me is changed behavior. How do I get there? How do I get this individual who is causing this kind of harm to change that behavior? How do we get there? And the processes and the systems that one group of people, and that's usually people who are content with the status quo, not like a racial or ethnic group, because it breaks across all lines. It's people who believe that the way we get there is by incarceration, is by being tough on people, because there's a different worldview on this. I believe people are good. I believe you meet them with resources. People who believe people are innately bad believe that the way you keep people who are innately bad in line is by consequences, by fear, by having them believe that if you step out of line, something bad will happen.
Can I ask you something? Isn't that something sort of what was used back with people, melanin level a little bit more than ours? Isn't it the same? Isn't that sort of the same philosophy?
It's the same system. It's the idea that if I put in you fear of consequences, of harm being done to you, you won't do harm. There was a certain police commissioner who would talk about how when people were getting COVID releases from jail, that was increasing. Don't. I'm just going to be real about this because I had this conversation with him. It was increasing the crime rate, which is to make you believe that somebody is at home watching Netflix and they see on the news that somebody was released because they're a health risk due to COVID. And they say, well, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to go commit a crime. That's not how human beings work. And so,
but Ricardo, I would not be fair and authentic because of my youth work experience and whatnot. A couple of folks was just. I'm just saying.
I'm not saying that people aren't bored. I'm not saying people aren't bored and they're committing harm because they're bored in some way, shape, or form, and that's a human condition too. What I'm saying is nobody sees somebody get released on COVID release and says, "I'm going to go commit a murder now." That's not how that works. And so when we're talking about how this actually works, you have to get to the root causes of crime. And we actually have a really smart county. Our county is actually really intelligent about where this comes from. I've seen polling on this. I know that people understand that what drives crime is lack of resources, lack of programming, lack of access to the things that they need, not that people are bad. And so if you want to address that for real, then you have to make a sort of law enforcement wing of this, our sort of district attorney wing of this, take that into account in how they make decisions and how they're positioning individuals. I'll just give you one small thing because I know you want to.
I got a couple of questions. Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So let me just give you an example of what I mean. Addiction. I dealt with people who were coming into our system because they were addicted to something.
Okay.
They were dealing with substance use disorder. Often what would happen is they didn't have mass health. So it was my job as a public defender to get them signed up for mass health. Then we would find them housing, or we would try to find them housing. Sometimes, depending on how and what they were able to do, we were able to get them a job. You could get them set up. It took the bureaucracy around all of that could take months. But because they're on probation, because you are criminalizing this, because it's coercive, because you have them in the system in this way, if they say miss a screening because they relapsed, they miss a drug screening, all that work you just did, that's gone, because either they're showing up and they're being held until their probation date, which means they're losing their job. They're losing that. If they had a car and it got towed, that ain't never coming back because the tow fees are going up. If they had a house, that's gone. It's impactful to that individual, and all of the things you've done to get this person situated and stabilized, gone until for the next 30 days until they come in for this probation hearing. And then you hear a judge say, "Well, you were doing so well. You had one slip up. I hope you learned your lesson. We're gonna let you go." And guess what? You're letting them go to? They lost their job. They lost
harm has already been done.
Yes, all of that's awful. So, like, when we talk about how we do this, I just want to be intelligent about it. I want to be honest about it. I want to talk about how this doesn't work the way that you want this to work. And if it doesn't work the way you want it to work, why are we doing it? What's that definition for insanity?
Come.
What's the definition for insanity? So
doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. That may not be verbatim, but let me because I want to be sensitive to time, and also you're still running a campaign. Tomorrow's a holiday. Still,
it's not a holiday for me.
I know. You're hitting that labor, and I'm hearing some. Again, I think Ricardo, and this is just James, with all due respect, Ricardo, right now. It's just so interesting because this platform exposes you to some stuff, and so I'm hearing some things.
I love this platform.
Don't. I'm hearing that the labor breakfast is going to be very interesting tomorrow, and I'll just leave that right there. And so I'll just leave that right.
Oh, no, I'm gonna be there, so I look
I
forward.
know, and I'm just going to anyway. So here's what I need to ask you, Ricardo, because I believe that if favorable for Tuesday, will perpetuate what Rachel Rollins started. You all shared values and things like that. And thank you for naming that it's not just you going in on what just Rachel did. You actually were a part of sort of that list of 15 and a working group and things like that.
Give her roses. Like,
I've been saying this from the beginning.
I'm not saying this about you. I'm just saying in general, like, you know, my opponent at one point was saying, oh, he's just trying to run on Rachel Rollins' platform. Yeah, if you were running on Rachel Rollins' platform, I would.
My God, Ricardo.
That's the whole point, right? So, like, yes, give her roses. She did more in 3. She got 9 exonerations in 3 years, 450 collective years of exoneration right there. She put out the last one with Stephen Pina. That one, I'm gonna give that to her as her 10th one. That was another 28 years. You're talking about liberation work for wrongful incarcerations. She solved 3 cold case murders. She did 15 list of 15. It was a success. Right, like, give this woman her roses. She did great work. And for somebody to come in and just be like, it was nice, whatever. I'm going to take some of this. I'm going to claim some credit for that. Like, even the, sentences, services over sentences program, that was Rachel. That's Rachel's program. So, like, when you talk about what this is, I respect people who trailblaze this work. I know how hard this is. This isn't easy. Go look up Ted Cruz talking about Rachel Rollins. Go see what she was under.
Can I be 100? Some of the mainstream media was not favorable toward the policies from Rachel Rollins, and I believe that and so to them, not only law enforcement, right supremacists, and then in real time, I'm thinking about the fact of how much some of those folks are in key positions in mainstream media. But let's also name that this speculation a contributing factor to they seeing you as the perpetuation of these policies. I have to ask you, Ricardo, when you talk about accountability, and we got 5 minutes kind of left, and so hopefully things are favorable for you on Tuesday. And so I need to know from you, sir, are you going to launch a independent investigation that you will only receive a report?
Yes.
In its ethics, you're not going to get no updates. You're not going to influence it. You're going to hire a person and not have any contact.
I'm an involved party. And so just so folks understand why this matters, this isn't about settling scores, right?
This is a systemic thing, because
this is literally an individual or multiple individuals worked to illegally leak confidential files from 15, 17 years ago that harmed, that people didn't want out, that harmed them. And so from the standpoint of a responsibility to those individuals, these institutions failed them. And so from the standpoint of just keeping it 100, you have to have accountability for that. And from my standpoint, that means if it's the U.S. attorney, if it's the attorney general, if it's another district attorney's office, somebody's going to be investigating that. It's not appropriate for it to be me.
Absolutely. So let me also
ask and assent to somebody else doing that investigation and following that where it goes. And then if they find wrongdoing, if they say, hey, we've identified who did this, there will be an independent, what was known as a special prosecutor, who will take over that case. It will not be me. But I want to see justice for that. There has to be some accountability for the fact that these institutions have a duty and a responsibility to the people who come into contact with them. And in this instance, they were failed.
I'm sorry, I just raised my hand on show. Hold on. So because I'm learning some stuff here. And so what you just said about the fact that there's only a year, let's say there's an investigation and the independent party comes in and they pinpoint there's 3 people that did it. My understanding right now is they would only get up to a year.
It would be up to a year. It's up to a year.
Let me ask you, and this is in real time. Would you work? Because this, unfortunately, Ricardo, you're I want to say microcosm. What we're observing today with you in the media, I will say, is a microcosm of systemic stuff that you named that's been going on. You said centuries or decades. And so does there need to be a consideration that you work with the legislature to, because people may not be fearful. One, it may be hard to prove. You know, you got former law enforcement officials that know the law.
No, I don't think it's that hard.
Would you look to increase?
To her.
Well, would you look to increase the time if something like this happened? That would be more than a year.
I'm even open to restorative justice on this. I just think it's really up to the individuals who were harmed by this, right? What I will say is both of those individuals have said directly. One of them has been in contact with me about how much they are angered by the fact that 2 weeks before the Globe did this, there were people harassing her at work, harassing her at her home, harassing her family, and she has the name of that individual. And so, from the standpoint of like solving this, it's not that hard a mystery to solve. And so, from the standpoint of that, it then comes back to what do those individuals want to see happen? So
I will name this. You name yourself. You were willing to go into some restorative justice with the young woman in the latest article that we referred to about the allegations.
Absolutely.
What I want to specify, and I'm asking you, if you become district attorney, will you work with the legislature around the penalty? And I know what you said about penalty, but these people have taken an oath and a charge to represent law enforcement.
Super rare.
Will you work with the legislature to get that 1 year increased to something else? Because folks aren't sweating a year.
I think so. Just to be clear, I think a day in jail is awful. But I would just say, from the standpoint of how often this happens, this is the other reason people really haven't looked at this. These records aren't like hanging out on somebody's desk. Okay, this isn't like somebody just had these and they were being handed around. I couldn't get these records without going to Superior Court and getting an unprecedented, literally that's what it says in the ruling, unprecedented ruling for these files to be released in full. Because again, I wasn't trying to hide anything. I wanted all these records out. They're all public. I didn't want to hide anything. But to get that done, I had to go to Superior Court and walk in there with an attorney and make an argument and get these records. This is not something that just happens. I mean, go ahead and Google it. You're not going to find, I don't think, another situation in Massachusetts where it has happened like this. This was very political. This was very, if you believe in coincidences like that, it's very coincidental that it dropped 2 weeks before an election, that somebody was tracking down these people and having conversations with them and sort of making them feel harassed. All of that is a problem. And you take me right out of it. Like, I shouldn't be involved in your thinking about that. If you care about how our systems are meant to operate with individuals, they never should have been subjected to that. And so for me, I think that's something that I would do in consideration. And I don't believe it's my role to just make that unilateral decision. I think that there are
survivors. Well, I said work with the legislature.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, in terms of whether or not I would push for that, I want to sit down with survivors, with folks who are involved, and see what they would actually want, what they believe is an appropriate way to handle this.
Good. My second question, given the nature of this, because I said, I'll be honest with you. I said to somebody tonight, if favorable for you, I believe that you would want to do the right thing and put the things in place. But let's say for some crazy reason you don't. You, by nature of what has happened here, are going to be under this particular subject in your office and the office that handles this. Mm-hmm. It's going to be under the microscope and so much scrutiny. I honestly, if there is anything to come out of this that is not traumatizing, that the attention that is brought to this and an extra level of accountability that you would probably already have, but now is just, it's nature of it. It's not a negative thing. It's just nature of it, that office would be a key priority. And so all that to say, are you or would you form an advisory group largely made up of everyday survivors? Some providers, but providers get in with all due respect to
absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that it's important. So, when you think about the district attorney's office, people often just think of attorneys, but there's a victim witness advocate unit, there's an investigation unit. And I think that when we talk about diversity, I'm not just talking about, I think we certainly need to see that office reflect the county, and it's not even close right now. But I'm also talking about diversity of life experiences. And I think it's important that when we're talking about how we make these decisions, that the people most impacted by how these decisions are made, by their own life experiences, by their own lenses, who understand these processes in terms of the ways in which they work through them or chose not to. because so many people choose not to work through these processes because they don't have faith in these processes, or these processes re-traumatize them or harm them. And so how are you going to create a system that addresses that if you're not bringing them to the forefront and saying what about this process was good, if anything? What about this process was harmful to you? And so often what I have seen as a public defender in our courts is that they just assume that the process is fine, that something's wrong with those individuals if they're not engaging with the process correctly. The amount of folks I saw threatened to participate in this process when they felt like that was harming them. The amount of people who I've seen harmed that way. These processes, I often get told that progressive policies don't care about survivors because people account it with like being unfair or not having accountability built into it.
Other people, yeah.
I believe in accountability built into it, but I also reject the premise that this system is good for survivors. I don't know many people who have been harmed, who have gone to our system seeking justice, who walk out of that system as it operates and said that was great.
Let me be honest with you. You talk to a cadre of people. I am preparing for this and seeing, make sure I'm in the right space and centering, survivors. I reached out to someone and inadvertently in conversation, oh my goodness, I can attest to you that they shared that it is not favorable towards survivors.
If you want to reimagine this and re-envision what this looks like, they have to be front and center. Like they have to be part of that process. It's not going to be, this should not come top down. This should come from the folks who have actually tried to access this system and have decided not to access this system because they're going to tell you why they did it. They're going to tell you why I didn't do that. And so you have to bring folks in to do that. I care passionately about that. I believe in harm mitigation. Like when I was sitting around thinking about running for district attorney, I understood that one person can't fix all of this. I don't believe in hero politics. I understood that I could do harm mitigation. I understood that I could make this system work for more people by brute strength than I could if I wasn't involved in it. And so I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work every day to make this a system that eventually I can be proud of having impacted, because I don't believe it's good for survivors. I don't believe it's good for people who come into it on the other side of it. And I just want to be clear, often survivors are coming in on both sides of it because harm and trauma. And so what we're talking about is trying to make a system that actually sees people, doesn't just see cases, doesn't just see individual charges, doesn't just see this as like, oh, I got 100 cases and I got to
off my caseload. Yeah.
Doesn't see this as like, because often our court systems work like a factory. You'll hear that from attorneys. It's basically how far behind are we on caseloads right now? Like we're 2-3 years out. We got to fix that. What's the track of that case? But it's not about how long does it take this person to get the resources or the services they need. How long does it take to get this person involved in ways that we need to? How well are we measuring reversing harm? How well are we measuring stabilization? We don't have data for that. We don't measure that. I don't believe if you're not measuring it, I don't believe you care about it. And so doing that work is why I ran. I didn't run because I thought that I could single-handedly make an unjust system just. I ran because I understood that if we don't push it, it's never going to move.
So one last question, because this just crossed my mind. You said you ran. You've run for office how many times previously?
2.
You were what assignment in the DA's office?
I wasn't in the DA's office. I was a public defender.
Public defender. Okay, so not an ADA. Okay.
Nope.
So you've been in the media. You've made statements. You got a lot of attention when you declared. There's probably some backlash from this too. When you declared racism as a public health crisis.
I did get backlash on that.
So let's understand and know, folks. I'm just going back to the point around the disingenuousness.
I mean, I also just did the Office of Police Accountability with Andrea Campbell.
Yep.
I did the surveillance oversight ordinance so that we could get, just so people understand the background on this.
So this
like I've done a lot of work on protecting civil liberties and protecting communities. Often when they bring out new technology, the law is years behind them. And so when they're using new surveillance tech, often it will take 2, 3, 4 years for that to work its way through the system and get legally challenged. And then they say, well, you can't use that anymore. That's legally challenged. But there's 3 or 4 years of harm. And so what the surveillance oversight ordinance says is before anything gets purchased with city money in Boston, they have to tell us what it is. What does this do? Yep. So that we have awareness, because surveillance oversight, just like most investigations, are private. And so basically when that happens, you only find out about it because the attorney finds out about it, because it's in the police report.
Exactly. So it's not
public. And so you can't preemptively get in front of it. You can't preemptively legislate for it. You got to be always on backup or reaction.
Yeah, or reaction.
Reactionary to it. This allows us to be proactive to it. That's not to say we won't have, surveillance that makes sense. It just means that you should be aware of it, because part of this is understanding that we should be, the way in which law enforcement and in our legal systems interact with our communities should be with our consent, should be with, I agree to this. This is a social agreement we are making. And if you don't know what you're agreeing to, how can you have that? You have to be able to make informed decisions. That's how I feel about our justice system. I want to make sure that our justice system is accountable and making informed decisions within community and with community. So I didn't, this was not some light, I think people sometimes get this messed up and they think that people are just looking to move up in their career. This was hard for me. This is a system that has often done more harm than good. I have witnessed it firsthand. To take something like that over, I felt a responsibility to the work Rachel did, to the price that she paid to get us there, to the price that community paid to push us there. I'm not going backwards. I'm not willing to do it. And so that's why I ran. That's what this is about. This is why I need your vote on Tuesday. If you are watching this and you are trying to figure out, do I want to vote for this man or not? I need your vote on Tuesday, because this system doesn't serve us. And if it's not going to serve us, if we keep folks there who think that the system is good, it just needs some tweaks. It doesn't just need some tweaks. It needs to be reimagined in almost every single significant way in which it interacts with folks. It claims a monopoly on caring about victims and survivors. It has no such monopoly. Most survivors who you speak to, I've seen it in the comments, will tell you that this system re-traumatized them, traumatized them, caused them harm. And so if that's true, and then you have so many people who don't even want to engage with it because they know it will cause them harm, or has caused loved ones harm, or has caused trauma to them. Because of that, if you want to create systems like this that are truly just, you have to work to change that. And that takes policy. That's not a gut feel thing. And so that's why I'm running. That's why everything is on Front Street. That's why I have a list with all the things I support. That's why it's there, so that you can hold me accountable to that. I will always be held accountable to these things. I believe in these things. I want these things to happen. And so you're voting essentially to make a change in how this system interacts. We get 20 to 25,000 cases a year. That's what we get a year. One term is 4 years. That's 100,000 people's cases. That's not including survivors or victims. That's not including their families on both sides. That's not including the community. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of impacted people in the course of 4 years. There's a lot at stake. And if you're going to go and vote on Tuesday, I need you to go tell friends what's at stake. This has so much potential, and it also has potential both ways. Potential to do more harm, potential to go back to a time where these things were not considered or thought about in the way that they should be, and potential to lessen harm and mitigate harm. I'll tell you another thing. It's not on the list. I support raising the age to 21. My opponent doesn't, for youth.
Raising the age up to be charged as a
juvenile. Because up to 21 is when your brain is developing. This is science.
First of all, let's say they also said it's going as late as 24, but go ahead.
Yes, I said 21. We can talk about 24. We're not even there right now. We're at 18. And so what we're talking about from the standpoint of juvenile offense, we know that for for-profit institutions like insurance, they take all that into account. If you got your license early and you were trying to get a car, you know that you paid premium rates because they knew your brain wasn't developed to understand consequences like drag racing or whatever. They knew that you had less understanding of danger, less understanding of risk, less understanding of consequences because your brain wasn't developed. We knew that for decades on the actual side. I know we've known that for for-profit institutions. They get it. They're gonna raise their premiums for you. How are we not doing anything similar?
In the same consideration in a lot.
Why are we doing that? Why does it work for for-profit institutions but not for our legal institutions?
You want me to answer that? Because one of those for-profit institutions is the jail system.
But let me be clear about this too. Over 90-something% of cases that have come into courts for our juvenile justice system are Black and brown children. I just want to be clear about what I just said. Over 90%, I think it's like 97 or 90, it's a crazy high number, are Black and brown children. And when you get into the diversion programs out of our juvenile system, only 70-some% are Black and brown children. You try to do the math on that and try to make that make sense without introducing racism and classism and all the different things that go into that. And so when we are the most impacted and the most harmed, you know, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley talks about this all the time.
Is that the closest
to the pain? Got to be closest to the power, but you also have to center that. You have to work. That's the crisis. That's the urgency. And so that's how I go after this. This is, you know, people have said to me, you know, how have you kept your head up? How have you worked through this? I've worked through this because I understand this was never about me. My name's on the screen right now. It's not about me. There are children, there are families right now in this city, in this county, who are going into courts or have families that are court involved or incarcerated who need this kind of leadership. And so I know that. I know what these policies mean to folks. You know, I thought I saw Conan Harris running around in the comment section. He knows what's at stake. They know what's at stake. They know what the consequences and the price is for this. And so from the standpoint of, you know, why I'm moving, why I'm not going to stop until 8 p.m. on Tuesday, there's so much at stake. It's not a joke. It's not a game. I know people say every election is the most important election of the year. Like,
no. This one
it impacts you for real. And so if we're going to see true justice, it has to be us showing up and mobilizing and not being distracted by noise and just saying, what's this mean to me for the next 4 years? That's what I want everybody to ask. What's this mean to me? What are the consequences one way or the other? What does this mean to me?
Can I say twofold?
Yes.
Me and our community. Because people that may not be involved in the system.
Think about that too.
Yeah, and the community.
You have to just say, what is the impact of this? What have broken policies of the past led to for our communities? What has the progress we made? Why are we clawing that back? Why couldn't that have existed? Why are you taking policies that have been proven to work and throwing them by the wayside, and then trying to sort of obfuscate why you're doing that or
hold on. I'm very transparent, and I like to increase my vocabulary. Say it, spell it, give the definition.
So, but my mom, OBFUSCATE. It basically obfuscate just means sort of hiding or sort of making it sort of hidden or difficult to see, right? Like that when you say things like, you know, I'm doing more. Oh man, I don't even want to go into this because he's not here, and people are gonna say that I'm talking about somebody who's not here. What I will just say is, when you take policies that work and say, okay, I'm not gonna do that policy, but what I'm gonna do is better than that policy, and what you're gonna do is what existed before that policy was even in place, and that policy was already better than everything that was in place. You're not telling the truth, and so I just need to be real with folks that there's beyond the words. There should be something that I could hold you accountable to. And when I say something like, if I wanted to do this, don't worry about it, y'all. I'm gonna look at cases on a case-by-case basis, and when people don't deserve to go to jail, I'm gonna make sure they don't. Well, how are you gonna hold me to that? What's the rule set? What's the structure for that? What is my definition of that? What does that mean? And so when we're talking about this, policies are what it means. It's like contracts. If I were gonna sell you a home, you would want a contract for that. You wouldn't want me to say, hey man, I own this house. You want to buy it from me? Paperwork.
If anybody comes and says it's not yours, I'll be there.
No paperwork. Yeah, I got you. We don't need no paperwork. This is my house. I'm selling it to you. That's different. Like, that's what this is. How would I go into a system like this that touches 20 to 25,000 people and say, hey, I don't have any paperwork for you. You just got to trust me that I'm going to do a good job. I'm going to look at everybody by case. You can't. That's irresponsible. And so that is why, exactly, because I say so. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm just trying to say, on the ballot, you have policies that I plan on being held accountable to. You have policies that are going to be done in partnership with community. You have policies that have been proven to work. You have all of that. I'm not just saying here, because some of these policies we don't even do yet. We're talking about taking them from other places and looking at places where they work. I want Suffolk County to lead the way on justice reform, to lead the way on true restorative justice impact. And here's why I want that. Because I think it'll lower crime. Because I think it'll actually reduce crime. Because
which ultimately leads to an overall improved quality of life. It leads
for everybody. People with jobs are in a better place. People with housing are in a better place. You know what doesn't help the situation? Making it so they can't access housing, making it so they can't access jobs, making it so they can't access student loans. I've never seen that help. So when we're talking about how we go about this, it's structured. It's not gut feelings. It's not because I feel like that makes sense. It's because there's data to back that, because there's evidence to back that. That's what I'm putting on the table. And that's what I'm trying to recenter with folks. When you talk to your friends, I don't want you to say, I saw Ricardo Roy. I think he's a good dude. I think he's really cool. I want you to say, look, this is what's at stake. One of them wants to end mandatory minimums. The other one doesn't. One of them wants to end qualified immunity. The other one doesn't. One of them believes in not charging children as adults, and the other one doesn't. That's what's at stake. That is what we are talking about. It's not, about a name or another name, or I know this name better, or I know that name better, or I heard this, or I heard that. It's about what you are going to see this office do for the next 4 years and what we are going to live with. And I just want to be clear, incumbency is difficult. So if you think that this is something where like you're just going to unseat an incumbent.
How long was our last DA in?
16 years, I think. Was it 2002 to 2016? Like
somewhere around there.
Something like that. It's a long time. So we're talking about like this is what went into my thinking for running. Can I afford to wait 10 to 12 years to restart a conversation on criminal justice reform? No. I can't wait 4 years. So why would I want to put myself in a position to have to wait 8 to 12 or 16 years again to have this kind of conversation about where and what does right by our communities? Not because I want to give special treatment to some and harm others. We already have a system that does that. I want to have a system that actually brings justice to our communities, not justice to some communities, not justice to some people with money, not justice to some people who have power dynamics within the city. I want to make sure we are actually truly creating a system that operates to reduce harm and reduce crime. That system does not exist. It's not a system we've had yet. So that requires new policies and a new imagining of what is possible within this office. And that is what I've been running on. That is what I've been talking about. And that is what I hope people vote for on Tuesday.
So, Ricardo, I have not been in the presence of your campaign conversation. I will say that this is one of the most, I'll be honest, this is one of the most hardest, stomach churning, bubble, just nervous because I know the weight of the policies to which you refer, and I know what we named about the re-traumatization of these women. But I will say also, this is one of the most in-depth conversations I had with you outside of the first that I came to your office when you got on city council. And I was like, Ricardo, you're the only black and brown man on this council. And so, the declaration of racism being a public health emergency definitely sort of spoke to that work. But in listening to you, I really am affirmed in my decision to support you. And still with the caveat, with all due respect, be on you, as you've been saying, policy. This cannot go on because of what I said. So I just really realized, as you said, and we know this as an incumbent, if we do not ensure that the continued work of Rachel Rollins happens and is solidified on Tuesday, we may be at risk. And Boston has a reputation for terms as long as what? 20 years, Jesus.
As long as they want. Yeah.
And so this is and that's a generation. And we don't want our young people in all that we're going to see demonstrated that we have not yet post-COVID and the psychosocial issues that in some cases, as you talked about, Ricardo, leads to some wrong decisions that can lead to being involved.
Leads to cause harm. But it's not because these are bad children, right? It's because they're in trauma.
Yep.
And so we have to treat it like that. And I will just say, people do interesting things like say, go look at it, or maybe don't. But if you look at social media, you'll see people say, this is going to be oh, it's going to be mayhem and all the crime rate's going to go up. But then go look at who's saying that and try to ask yourself why they're saying that about policies that censor the care and humanity of our people. Ask yourself why they're doing that. And I will just say, feel free to, people are going to watch this is on Twitter, Facebook. Feel free to keep tweeting that at me. I know it's not true. I know what bothers you isn't the idea that crime will go up, because tough on crime policies have not reduced crime in any county in which they exist. What bothers you is the idea of centering the humanity of the people who come into courtrooms. And I'm going to be proud to do that every single day I have this job. These will be human beings that are in my courtroom. They will never just be charges. They will never just be accused. They will be human beings. And when we center that, when we center the idea of reducing the amount of harm and trauma caused, that shouldn't cause anybody any issues. Nobody should be.
Can I just keep it real? Harm. Can I just keep it real?
Yes, 100%.
When you reduce crime, you reduce part of the capitalistic part of what comes with law enforcement about bigger budget, hire more police. Let's keep it 100. The more police they are, the more union dues that is paid. And so therefore the union is creased around their policy advocacy to have more police. And this perpetual cycle.
I'll take it even further. You had Bobby Constantine on here. You've had multiple publications, the Globe, Commonwealth. Everybody who writes about things in the city has written about how successful the List of 15 was. If these individuals cared about crime, they would support the List of 15 because it reduced crime. They don't support the List of 15. So you should ask yourself why people are supporting revoking or not keeping policies that have been proven to reduce crime if what they keep screaming at you is that what you're going to do is only going to increase crime. That doesn't make sense. So then you have to ask, why do
What's the motive?
Yes. And that motive is not to reduce crime. And so that is just facts. That is just what it is. If I say, hey, this policy has been proven, tested, data, evidence, it lowers the crime rate. And you say, oh, we don't need that policy. That policy's bad. Then there's a cognitive dissonance that doesn't make sense.
Because it comes to money.
And it comes to who receives respect from this system and who doesn't, and the perception of who comes into contact with this system and who doesn't, and who actually depends on actually seeking and seeing justice when they come into our justice systems. And so I know that. I know the weight of that. I've represented hundreds of people in our courts. I have seen the trauma. I have seen people win, and winning was like I went through 3 months in jail and then my case got dismissed. But I lost my house, I lost my car, and the case should never happen in the first place. That's not winning, okay? I've seen people who are too poor to be innocent because they can't pay bail. You have people, I'll just tell you, they're too poor to be innocent. I used to call it too poor to be innocent, where you would have somebody who had $500 of a bail. So for many people, that's a lot of money. For some people, that's all of their money. And so they got a $500 bail. They can't afford it, and the charge doesn't lead to jail time. And so if you can't pay a bail, you're going to jail. And so what would happen in that instant is that individual would say, Mr. Attorney, if I just plead guilty to this, am I going to go to jail? And the answer is no. You're going to get a Corey. You're going to get a quaff, maybe. You're going to get something, but it won't be jail, but it will be on your record. And they go, well, I'm not going to jail because I can't afford to go to jail. So you have an individual who can't afford to be innocent. And that's why I support ending cash bail for nonviolent offenses. Because if I could pay $500 and afford to be innocent, but you can't simply because you are poor, then that only exists for poor people. It only exists to punish poor people. And so this is why I do this. This is what gets me up. This is what makes me go out and work on this. That's what gets me ready for the attacks and the fights and the Twitter hate. None of that matters when you have ever seen, if you have ever seen the ways in which this system chews an individual up, changes the entire of their life. Exactly. And that's why you care. If you've ever seen this, if you ever seen somebody lose their home, lose their family, lose access to their family, lose their job, lose their health care, commit suicide, overdose, based off of their interactions with our system, then you will do whatever it takes to make this system work better. And that's where I'm at. None of this other stuff matters like this. People are coming into, and by the way, they they are so dependent on people making decisions like this collectively for a better future. They are so dependent on that because they are often ostracized, disenfranchised, and kept out of our systems and our processes. And so you try to bring those folks in, you try to grow it, but you also have to understand that these systems do their very best to make it harder for folks to participate in our processes, to make it harder for them to make informed decisions, to make it harder for them to do that. That's why, what a difference a DA makes, that campaign was so important, because it taught so many people that this was an elected office and that it had this kind of power. And so, I've talked for a lot. I think we've been on for an hour and a half, but I just want people to understand what this is about. It's so much bigger than you or me. And frankly, it's national. You're seeing other people do this work nationally and come under attack. And the fact of the matter is, in Suffolk County, go look at the numbers. Under Rachel, crime went down. I have people say, well, Ricardo, shootings are up. Well, that's interesting. Shootings are up under this new tougher on crime thing that we got going on. So maybe that doesn't work. And so when they talk like that, it's not a reflection on Rachel's policies. Under Rachel, those policies led to reduced crime. And yet she still caught hell. And it wasn't because people actually cared about reducing crime. It's because they didn't like that she said what the system did to individuals. They didn't like
that's part of the issue they have with you too.
And I welcome it, because that's why I'm into this. That is why I'm doing this work, because people who are opposed to this, they don't hide. They're loud. They're going to do what it takes. They're going to go vote. That's why I'm out here. When I first ran the beginning of this race, people would say, Ricardo, if you talk like this, maybe tone it down about how much you care about changing things within the system and making these policies happen, because, the other side is going to say you're weak on crime, or you're soft on crime, or they're saying that anyway. They're going to say that no matter what I say. They know right off the bat what I want to try and do here is create a more just system for everybody, not just a system that works for some, not a system that does things that sound tough or look tough, but data and evidence show actually cause generational harm and cause increases in crime. I'm not here for that. And so when we talk about that, I want to be as loud as them. If you're going to yell at me about how this is bad, I'm going to yell right back about why this is good. And I need folks that engage in this to be just as loud about the importance of this seat, just as loud about the importance of these policies, just as loud about the importance of our vote on Tuesday.
Ricardo, thank you, because I'll be very honest. I struggled with naming the allegation. I struggled with, all of that. And for me, it goes back to what you said about the risk at hand of this office. What's at risk for the next 4, 8, 12, 16 years? So I do want to thank you, because I believe in a lot of the feedback. As much as you noticed someone trolling on Twitter, there was also some people that said, hey, thank you, because it was a comprehensive sort of space and it affirmed where some people sort of were. And so hopefully tonight you all are leaving better informed and hear directly from Ricardo his response to 2 major questions that people had around what was going on with the unfounded allegation, and also how it could be easily perceived based on how the media was presenting his response to about whether he knew about this and when and all that other stuff. So Ricardo, I will definitely let you go.
I appreciate it. I gotta pour into my loved one who's been pouring into me. So
yes, sir.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, sir. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, that was our candidate for district attorney, Ricardo Arroyo. I'm tired and got a slight headache. And so, Brother Conan, you're still here, because he made reference to you a few minutes ago. And so again, I did feel obliged to sort of bring this to the attention of our community based on what's at risk on Tuesday. And Ricardo brought it out so well. It's not just Tuesday. It's the next 4 years. It's your nieces, your nephews, your uncles, your cousins, those that may be dealing with substance use disorder. And so thank you all for listening in this evening. Camilla, good to see you in the room. Thank you all for listening in this. So there's some truth tellers in my life, and thank y'all for the affirmation, because I struggled. So I'm getting off of here. Please remember to remember. I think it was Tanisha or somebody got, Andrea Campbell got on the other day and said, you plan the party, plan to vote. Don't overdo it on Monday, tomorrow for Labor Day. Go listen. What is at risk is a local and on the same level was what was at risk in the November election of 2020. Now, I don't want to cross into the lines of some fear mongering that other folks, and that's the tactics that the other side use. This is some mobilization around the fact that we need to get out and ensure that we don't wind up having the next 4 years policies that were opposite of what we understood, learned, and saw implemented from what we learned from what the difference the DA makes. This is major, and we must ensure that the person that's most demonstrated our values and change gets in that office. That's it for me, everyone. Brother, thank you. Rachel, thank you. Anyway, I'm getting off of here because this, I don't do it for that. And I know, but if this thing does nothing else to try to inform and mobilize. And so, and also I would be remiss. I have to ensure, and I'm going to put this in the comments, as Ricardo said, and I really wish I was a little more intentional about this because we probably lost some viewers. But I want to ensure you all will see this. That is the banners. I need to go to the comments. Sorry, I'm old, y'all. Sometimes I got to talk this stuff out to get it right. If you go look in the comments right now, there is a link for the state of Massachusetts that has resources if you were dealing with domestic violence, sexual assault. And so y'all know me. I'm going to bring it up right now on screen so we can just look at it together for a couple of seconds. Where did it go? See, all right, Chrome tab. I'm tired, y'all. Please forgive me. Statewide. There we go. Share. So, all right, where am I? All right, I got to go back to this screen to do that. All right, so this is where you can go. There's the Rape Crisis Center, Western Massachusetts, Central Massachusetts, Northeastern, Southeastern, Boston 128 area related, Rape Crisis Centers, Western Mass, New England Center for Women. There are resources here for everyone around sexual assault and survivors. And so please share, go copy that link and say, hey, got to listen to, candidate Ricardo tonight, but more importantly, here's some information for those of you that are either re-traumatized by this conversation. All right, so thank you all for tuning in this evening. Hopefully this was informative. Hopefully it contributed to your, I'll be honest, vote is the priority. Exercise your right. With everything we shared tonight, part of this democracy is you still have a right to go in that booth and make a decision. Now, where I have some influence, I'm telling you, we got to ensure that the continued work of Rachel Rollins and the difference the DA makes continues on Tuesday. I can't say that enough. So, all right, folks, I'm off of here. Have a wonderful evening. I will see the regular Java with Jam. I'm tired. Java with Jimmy Fam tomorrow morning briefly at 9 a.m. And don't forget Thursday, y'all. I don't know what we're doing, but there's a birthday celebration on Thursday. And so anyway, these ain't the regular folks that are in here. I think, I don't know. I'm off of here. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. It's important on Tuesday that we go out and participate and vote Ricardo in as the next district attorney of Suffolk County. Thank you all. Have a great evening.